The Ku Klux Klan was established in the 1860s and is the oldest and most infamous hate group in America. The Klan was a negative reaction to the Reconstruction era. Its history can be broken down into the establishment and growth of the Ku Klux Klan, the peak of its political dominance in the southern states, and its struggle to be subdued by the government. Abraham Lincoln passed the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, which declared that all persons held as slaves within rebellious states are, and henceforth, shall be free. After Lincoln's death, the Democratic Andrew Johnson became president. Congress and Johnson disagreed on how to bring the rebel states back into the Union. Congress was extremely Republican, while Johnson believed in old-fashioned Southern morals. From 1867 to 1868, President Johnson and legislation debated over whether multiple Reconstruction Acts should be passed. Congress succeeded in overpowering Johnson's vetoes and passed the first Reconstruction Acts, which governed the process by which the former Confederate states would again join the Union. These acts required the Confederate states to ratify the 14th Amendment that granted citizenship and protected civil liberties of recently freed slaves. Every state would have to make a new state constitution that must be approved by Congress before being enacted. Martial law was established in 5 military districts, each supervised by a general. These served as the government control center over each region. Since the U.S. government was distracted with the important work of reconstructing the South, groups devoted to white sovereignty were formed without government interference. Even though the war was over, the country was still in danger of conflict because Southern attitude towards blacks went unchanged. In the vacuum of chaos, the KKK formed in late 1866. It started as a social group with no goals of violence toward blacks. The main reason for the Ku Klux Klan was to provide entertainment for bored ex-Confederate soldiers. In Pulaski, Tennessee, 6 Southerners, Frank McCord, John Kennedy, James Crow, Calvin Jones, John Lesser, and Richard Reed decided to form a club. Ku Klux Klan originated from the Greek word klukos, meaning circle. Klan was added afterwards, giving the name a queer ring. Once the Ku Klux Klan was born, the founders came up with strange names for every position, bizarre rituals, secret codes, and initiation ceremonies. The Klan spread throughout the South like wildfire in less than a year. The thrill of wearing hoods and not getting caught or hurt by the authorities appealed to many. In addition to living in wartime conditions for years, night rides were a way to get back at the Republicans and the blacks. The first night ride was a simple affair that consisted of very few men wearing hooded gowns. The KKK acted like ghosts of ex-Confederate soldiers to scare anyone. Most blacks the Klan came upon did not fear the hooded men, but a handful were afraid because of their superstitious beliefs. Riders used this reaction to their advantage and began to taunt blacks. They went to black households with guns and threatened inhabitants because blacks owned land or had a respected job in the community. Due to early incidents and latent hate of blacks, the Ku Klux Klan soon evolved from a social club into a racial hate group. In 1867, delegates elected from Klan dens all over the South met at the Maxwell House Hotel in Nashville, Tennessee. A Democratic convention was already going on at the hotel, which allowed for secrecy and no suspicions from outsiders. Klan dens throughout the South all functioned differently until they found common ground on their hatred of Reconstruction policies. The new Klan, with its new philosophy, elected former Confederate General Nathan Bedford Forrest, and they came up with their own constitution. In an interview, Forrest said the KKK totaled about 550,000 men, which was 11/15 of the whole Confederate Army. One of the KKK's goals was to ruin the reputation of blacks, to destroy African Americans' chances of moving up the ladder of Southern society. Another of the Klan's goals was to see that all black labor was chained to white mastery because Southerners saw them as a threat to the white race and to white employment. No outside interference was tolerated by people who tried to aid African Americans, such as carpetbaggers and scalawags. Carpetbagger was a term used to describe Northerners who traveled to the South during the Reconstruction era, carrying carpetbags. Scalawags were Southerners who agreed with Reconstruction. Both carpetbaggers and scalawags were not tolerated by the KKK. The Klan's propaganda portrayed itself as an institution of chivalry, humanity, mercy, and patriotism. Klansmen thought of themselves as Southern heroes, saving and defending the Southern people. The Ku Klux Klan opposed Congress's plan for Reconstruction, in part because it established public schools for blacks in the South. Klansmen viewed education as a gateway to financial prosperity. Almost all the Klan's leaders were rich tycoons or plantation owners, and the last thing they wanted was African Americans to have a chance at the life they were living. They were resistant to the Reconstruction Acts, which stated voters were to be registered, all freemen were to be included, and the KKK opposed this because all Southern adult males could vote. Finally, the poor could not be whipped or thrown into jail for minor crimes or debt, since most of the poor consisted of blacks. First, Klansmen would send warnings to their victims, threatening violence if their demands were not met. If African Americans stayed and continued on with their daily lives, African Americans could be flogged, whipped, or even lynched. Pierce Harper, a slave from Texas, stated, "There was a colored man they taken. His name was Jim Freeman. They taken him and destroyed his stuff in him because he was making some money. Hung him on a tree in his front yard right in front of his cabin."
The Klan began to ride into politics during the election of 1868 between Ulysses S. Grant and Horatio Seymour. Grant was a highly decorated Union general from the Civil War, and almost all of the North was bound to vote for him. His Democratic opponent, Horatio Seymour, was from the North but favored Confederate states. Almost all Southern blacks were Republicans since the Republican Party guaranteed rights to recently freed slaves. The 1868 election was critical because it was the first election after the end of the Civil War and the first election where blacks could vote. The opposing Southern views between the Ku Klux Klan and African Americans resulted in extreme voter intimidation at the polls. Many violent incidents occurred and peaked in the weeks before the election. Hooded men would guard the ballot boxes, making sure only Democratic ballots were cast. If ballots were found not in their favor, the Klan could easily identify the voter because voters' names were printed in the newspaper. Whole families could be murdered because of a man's participation in voting. Therefore, black families strongly discouraged men to vote in the election. In Arkansas alone, over 200 murders occurred due to voting disputes. In Louisiana, the Klansmen gathered black Republican voters and forced them to cast Democratic ballots, or they would be shot. Much of the Klan's violence was tolerated because authorities joined the Klan out of fear or sympathy. The KKK was responsible for thousands of deaths during the election of 1868. However, despite these efforts, Ulysses Grant was elected as president. Although the Republican Party had more registered voters, Grant barely pulled through with a 5.4% lead. After the election, Forrest, the Grand Wizard, officially disbanded the Ku Klux Klan because he thought the Klan was becoming too violent. President Grant worried that the Republican Party was dying out in the South, so Congress passed the Enforcement Acts. The Enforcement Acts, also known as the Ku Klux Klan Acts, enforced the 14th Amendment and are still in effect today. However, the violence continued. The president, to quell violence and investigate Klan activity, sent the Union Army into heavily Klan-populated areas. Once numerous servicemen realized the rumors of the Ku Klux Klan's violence were true, they gathered testimonies from victims of the Klan and suppressed KKK activity. In reaction to all the violence the blacks had endured through the previous years, several came forward to testify against Klansmen. Many Klan members were sent to jail, but their time in jail was abbreviated because the legal system was clogged with Klan trials. Nevertheless, Klansmen fled to Canada or hid in the woods to avoid arrest. Eventually, the Klan fizzled out because of a lack of members and law enforcement. However, the KKK philosophy of white supremacy and hate did not truly fade away because the aristocratic social structure of the South never died out. The Ku Klux Klan rose again in the 1920s in response to mass immigration from Europe, and then again in the 1960s due to the Civil Rights Movement. But it was far less militant and not as traditionally rooted in its Southern culture. The Ku Klux Klan was a reaction to the Reconstruction era due to its beneficial laws for African Americans, and they indirectly continued the Civil War underneath their hoods for over 100 years.